Michael is a genius when it comes to technology. He forgot that he turned off a thing, and then for 20 minutes he was checking for that thing. He's like, why isn't this working? He had not checked whether or not it was off. Anyway, that's fun.
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome back to the SPIRE Podcast. As you can see, there's only two of us here. Sadly, Fulton got sick. He's probably like... Actually, I'm not going to make guesses to how sick he is. He's probably just not feeling good. Yeah. So, today, we are going to do what we said we would start off with last one. So if you were able to make it to the end of last episode, during Lent, we decided together to share... one of our days of doing SPIRE, S-P-I-R-E. What did we do? And I realized I left my notebook in my room. So while you answer that, I'm going to go get my notebook.
Well, I feel like I have to wait for you because I can't even like tell you what it is if you're not in here. Mine is on my phone. You can go first if you want, and then I can just...
Do you want us to restart the intro, or are you fine?
I don't really care.
This is going to be fun. I think we should leave all of this in.
I'll leave it.
Because you're lazy enough for that?
I am lazy.
I love it. Okay, so I'll start. Also, last time I remember talking about like the stuff that's in my journal. A couple days ago, I was just like reading through it and like, wow. I hadn't realized just how like much I think through things. Mm-hmm. And just how much I like actually like, I don't flippantly write stuff down. I like actually explain my thoughts and whatnot.
That's good.
Yeah. So, what I did... Let's see.
So are we just going to do like, this is good for us to figure out, I guess. Or are we just going to say like our favorite thing from each domain each week?
One day.
Like, it's like, oh, you say everything you did for one day?
One day. Yeah, S-P-I-R-E.
I'm going to have to try and remember that. I might end up mixing days together.
That's fine. It's fine. I just, because that way we see both the successes and the failures.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm going to... pick one of the good days. Let's go with Friday. So for my spiritual, I put down usual routines. This is like my normal daily prayer routines. And then I also went to Mass. And so that was my spiritual side of things. For physical, Friday was a bit rough. I was busy and then I just didn't work out. So at the end of the day, I did a brief... Oh, no, I did work out. This was Friday. I did a brief full body and stretch. So I just like pull-ups and just everything I could think of to do full body in my apartment. And I stretched, which is good to do. For my intellectual one, this was fun. That day, my mom asked me a question about a physics problem that my whole family had been struggling to find out. And so I had to explain it to them. And it was great. Mom, I'm sorry if you don't like how I brought that up. But it was fun. And I really enjoyed doing that. For our relational, there was two of my office mates at WashU. We were just talking a lot of the hours that we were there, and it was kind of fun. Evangelical, I have a ... meaning it was just rough today. Evangelical, that's one of the hard ones for me to do because I don't really try to do it intentionally. At the end of the day, I'm like, what did I do that could fit into this? And I put, I guess talking with... Dominic, one of the guys, WashU, my office mate, his name Dominic, so not the Dominic you know. Yeah. He's Catholic, and so we were just talking about Catholic things, and it was cool to do that. Yeah. And then I can go into my actual journal part, but you guys don't want to hear that.
Okay, I'm going to try and do Saturday because, little disclaimer, all of my stuff is on my phone, which is being used to record this.
That's a hilarious thing. I was like, why don't you
shot on my phone? But I'm going to try and remember Saturday. So for Saturday, spiritual was listening to the Bible in the year. I kind of split Bible in the year up into two different things because there were two things I did with Bible in the year.
Yeah.
But so I listened to Bible in the Year by Father Mike Schmitz. I think I listened to like 3 episodes on Saturday. On like 2 times speed.
I listened to like 4. Just driving around.
You're just going to flex on me? You just have to listen to more
No,
than me?
I just hadn't been caught up, and I was like, I need to catch up, even though I couldn't make it to the meeting.
For physical, I was slacking on Saturday. That's been the hardest one for me, honestly.
My Saturday was worse. My Saturday was the day I'm like, I did a back stretching?
I didn't do anything. Most days, because I finally got cleared to throw and to hit again. So I've been like doing just T drills and like just soft toss and stuff.
What's a T drill?
It's like a batting tee, and I just do drills,
okay.
and I do top and bottom hand, and I do like whatever. Just hitting drills on a tee, just like that kind of stuff. And I did that a couple days, but I didn't do that on Saturday. Intellectual, there's a YouTube channel called Daily Dose of Wisdom that I watch all the time, and he came out with a new video. I didn't watch the whole thing. Or what?
Is it a daily dose or
like is it every day?
Yeah.
I don't understand the channel name because it's Daily Dose of Wisdom, but he doesn't post every day.
Well,
So
he
it's
used to, and it's like
Yeah,
I know
I
that
don't
like Daily Dose of Internet used to do that, but does it?
Yeah, I wasn't
Actually,
around when he
I don't know.
started it.
No, it's weird.
But it was, what was it? It was him interviewing John Lennox, who's one of my favorite Christian.
I almost heard John Lennon, and I'm like, that dude is dead.
Yeah, it was not John Lennon. So that was intellectual, relational. I worked on music with our friend Dominic. Song, it's a banger. It'll come out at some point this year.
He has not let me hear it yet.
I have
I'm
not
sad.
let Nick hear it. There's only been like 3 people that have heard
So Dominic, he'd not break his promise to you.
it. I did not. I was thinking about it and I didn't show you because I was like, we showed it to Thomas. It doesn't have lyrics in it, but Thomas was there when we were working on it. So that was relational. I just spent that time with Dominic. And then evangelical, so for this one, it was also Bible in the Year, but it was because we had the discussion later and we were able to just talk about it. And I'm not saying I was evangelizing those people, but we were all able to kind of talk about our faith and talk about the Bible and stuff together, which could also be spiritual. It could also be intellectual, but I use that for my
favorite thing is dual posting. So like Thursday, I went to a theology of the body discussion. I'm like, intellectual, relational, evangelical, all the same. Easy dubs, which is totally fine to do. But also on that evangelical front, which is like you weren't necessarily evangelizing. A talk I went to over the weekend, Pete Burak was talking about 7 reasons you don't evangelize, and I'm not going to spoil that because that's going to be a future video. But like one of the things he was saying is that we are all called to evangelize, and if you don't feel you're ready, then like the way you evangelize is by learning. You evangelize to yourself and with others, and so like that, talking with other people about faith stuff definitely counts.
Yep. And then I said something on Instagram. You guys should all do SPIRE for Lent too. It's never too late to start. You could start 30 days into Lent if you wanted to. But it's still early enough in Lent that you could start it and do it for most of Lent. So if you want to do SPIRE with us...
You can still do it for 40 days because Lent is actually like 47 days long.
If you do it on the Sundays and
it doesn't include like Holy Week. So I need to do the math as to like when the actual end of the 40 days is. Because I don't really know. I think it's 47 days total.
But you just saw us, like, we still screw up. We don't do it perfectly every day. There were things that we missed on some days.
Man, I gave you like my best day.
That's like, that doesn't, it's not about doing it perfectly. It's just about incremental steps towards, getting better every single day.
Yeah.
So
and Fulton being sick has done it this week. And he did text me what he did because he wants to be part of that. And I asked him to. Spiritual. He prayed the Angelus at 6, 12, and 6, like he said last week. Rosary, asking for specific graces. Actually, that's a pro tip on praying the Rosary. Don't just pray the Rosary. Intentionally pray for a specific thing when you pray the Rosary. So that's cool that Fulton said that. For physical, workout, focus on conditioning and full body. And walking outside. That's a good one. I might use that sometime if I ever end up on a walk. I don't do that much.
I'm going to say, I walk to my car to go to school in the morning.
Intellectual, listening to Restore the Glory podcast. He suggested that last week. Now I know it's Restore the Glory. I'll look that up. Relational, had lunch with group of people from work. That's a great way to be relational. Evangelical, focused conversation with a friend from work about Jesus and the reality of what he is inviting us to. Man, Fulton beats us out on that.
I know.
He just wins.
That was the best day out of all 3 of ours.
Yeah, Fulton's gung-ho and he's amazing. Sad that he's not here today. We're going to talk about some really beautiful things. Being art, but yeah. Yeah.
This is the second time the topic today was supposed to be, maybe it'll be next week. It was supposed to be, what was it? It was like, how do
Glorifying
you glorify God
yeah.
through art? And this is the second time we were going to try and do it. And the first time we were going to try and do it was the last time Fulton couldn't make it. So hopefully we'll do it someday.
Basically, we'll make this the schedule. We'll do glorifying God through art whenever we don't want Fulton here. No, we miss the dude. But yeah, so today, per Fulton's suggestion, because him being gone, he got to pick the thing for us to talk about. And we had no idea. We're bad at that. But he said to talk about how you explain God to yourself and others. Like, do you do it primarily emotionally, relationally, intellectually, analytically, whatnot? So what are your thoughts on how you explain God to yourself?
It's a tough question because I feel like, so I've never really had the opportunity to talk to somebody who doesn't believe that there's a God. So it's not like I have in my head like how I think I would do it for somebody else, but I don't genuinely know. For myself though, I don't know, because a lot of people tend to look at God as like this, sky daddy, the big man with a beard in the sky, and he's always like watching you and he's just like waiting to condemn you kind of thing.
Oh no, you did that. Smite.
And that's like the Christopher Hitchens thing where he's like, even if God existed, like I wouldn't worship him because he's so terrible and he's so awful. And it's like, he's this vindictive kind of,
How does Christopher
deity.
Hitchens know this about God if God doesn't exist?
That's the question, isn't it?
Like, why is it that just as the existence of a God means that this God has to be like that? Like, I guess he has reasons for that.
He does, but he,
But,
whatever.
Obviously if God existed, he'd be evil, mean, and terrible, which is why we believe in him.
Obviously. That's why people worship him.
I'm great at sarcasm.
I feel like for me, though, the way I would try and kind of conceptualize the idea of God, it's really helped to solidify it in my mind, understanding arguments for God, and I'm not going to talk about that right this second, but there's certain arguments like the argument from change, and it's essentially, it gets around to the point that God has to be unchanging. He has to be the unactualized actualizer, kind of. Yeah. So
fancy terminology.
It's fancy terminology, but it's basically just he has to be the same now as he always has been and always will be, like by definition. And there's, I don't know, there's that one, and then there's things about how he has to be personal, he has to be outside of time and space and everything, and you can use these logical kind of arguments and deductive things to get to an idea of what he is. And I don't really know, like, God is a hard thing to really conceptualize, but he's the unmoved mover. He's the first cause. I don't know. It's a hard question because, like, I have it in my head of, like, kind of I understand. No, I don't understand. I'll never understand.
You understand that he does exist for reasons, and you have some idea of some of those reasons.
Yeah, but it's like it's not that I understand what he is, but I think it's that I understand what he's not.
That's a good
almost
way of putting it. Yeah.
Because again, the Christopher Hitchens thing, he like says things and I'll listen to him and I almost like convulse because I'm like, oh, that's so not true. And it's like if I'm thinking to myself even right now, like, how do I define God? It's like I can't even really put it into words because I can say things like the unmoved mover or like whatever, but that doesn't sum it up. But I understand what he's not, which kind of leads me
to understand
what he is in kind of a weird roundabout way. Like, but I don't know how to like sum it up. And
that's
like
very much akin to like some scientific philosophies of, Karl Popper, some whatever scientific philosopher of the 18th century, something around those times. It's basically like science is falsification. You cannot ever prove something with science. All you can do is disprove things. And if you fail to disprove things enough, you have enough argument, you have enough reasons to believe it unless it eventually gets disproven. And so it's like that
That's
kind of
actually,
idea.
yeah.
It's that kind of idea. It's like, well, clearly I know that God is not that candle that is on my. You probably can't see it because it's probably crapped out. But there's a candle on the table here, and I'm like, God is probably not that. There's one less thing God is. And if you want to fully disprove God's existence, you got to go through all the options.
I would
according
also
to
say,
science, at
so
least.
I guess if I have to define it or define God, I would say that God is the perfect being. And that sounds super simple, but when you think about perfection, which I think you've wanted to talk about perfection forever, so maybe I'll let you talk about that. But
I mean, we all love talking about perfection.
yeah, but you were talking about like the Thomistic metaphysics of perfection. Or
Oh,
whatever,
yeah, that
but
stuff.
I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I'll let you talk about that if you want. But if I have to sum it up, you would be the essence of perfection, like kind of.
Yeah,
I don't know
just-
how to say it.
Well, in the Bible, when God reveals himself to Moses, to Abraham, he says, I am who I am. All of us, when we say, who are you? Oh, I'm a human. I'm a man. I'm, 5'10". I'm weigh 220 pounds. I this, I that. We can define ourselves by our qualities. God is the only being who defines himself by himself.
Who defines himself by his being.
By his being. So when it says, like, I am who am, another way of, like, translating that is, I am being.
I be who be.
I be who be. Yeah, that is another way of translating it. I be who be. Which doesn't sound, it sounds weird. I be who be. I be who be. But, like, God is the essence of being. He is isness. God is. And there's some podcasts that I listen to, some like Pants of Aquinas stuff. I think that he talks about, the isness of God. Or maybe it's Bishop Robert Barron at Word on Fire. But like, there's just a really cool way they put it. I forget the exact wording, but it's like, God is who is. That's not that. But it sounds funny, but it's actually really insightful.
Okay, maybe what would be helpful for us, because I'm struggling to kind of say it, and you said it better than me. But if I'm somebody who I've never even heard of the idea of a God, how would you go about explaining it to me? And then maybe what would be your first step to try and show me that what you're saying is even true? Because we can say it, but if it's not true, then it doesn't matter.
So for someone who has never even heard of the concept of God, I would explain it differently than how I understand it myself, because there's reasons for that.
Which is fine though, because people say if you can't explain something to a 5-year-old, you don't actually understand it. It's like if you can explain something in simple terms to somebody who doesn't know anything about it. Because again, I was just trying to do it where I try and say the unactualized actualizer, where it's like I try and say all these fancy words, and it's like, do I really understand what I'm saying if I can't communicate it in simple, clear, concise terms? So I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. So if we look back thousands of years ago, thousands of years in history, or even hundreds of years ago, that too, or even dozens of years ago, we see people trying to explain things of this world. So the history of the term God originated when humans looked at the trees or the ocean or the wind and was like, how does this work? And they came up with the idea of there is some being or some set of beings that govern this, that make this happen. There is the god of the north wind. There is the nymphs of the trees. There's the god of the ocean. And that's how you get the pagans who believe in, say, the Greek pantheon or the Roman pantheon or the Egyptian pantheon or the pantheon that includes Thor. There's a name, the Norse pantheon. All of those which ranged thousands of years of history, believed in a multitude of gods that did stuff, that were the explanations for the unexplainable. And that's why a lot of that's why a lot of people in the modern age say there is no God, because any explanation of God is just what we don't understand well enough with science.
Mm-hmm.
But this search for something that explains that which is puts us on a path. And it puts us on a path. We could talk about the history of the Israelite people or whatnot. But for someone who doesn't know what a God is. So what God is that which underlies all things. So if we want to get into the Thomistic, first mover, you have a ball rolling down a hill. It hits another ball, launches it rolling. That hits another ball, launches it rolling. That's cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
This ball, standing stationary on a table, is not just going to randomly decide to start rolling at 2,000 miles an hour. It needs something to hit it to do that. And so the idea is, well, if everything needs something to hit it to get moving, what started all the moving? So either there's an infinite amount of things that keep moving and it just extends on for infinity, which doesn't really understand scientifically speaking.
Yeah.
Science cannot explain such a thing, except for saying, if it is like this, then this is what would happen. Or there's something that does not need to be hit to be moved. That is called the unmoved mover. And that being we name God. That is the first proof of St. Thomas Aquinas.
Mm-hmm.
But to someone who has no idea of godness, that's probably really confusing.
Yeah.
But yeah, God is the essence of perfection, as you were saying. All of these things in this world that the Egyptians, the Norse, the Romans, the Greeks, all of these people that saw good things of the world, the trees, the wind, the ocean, and attributed to some God, little g God, they saw perfection and it attributed to a higher being.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't take the next step, because they had the God of the ocean, the God of the mountains, the God of the wind, and those were all different gods with different attributes and whatnot. But if you take it to the next logical step, these gods then are that good thing. And you have a multitude of good things, And so why not go one step further and say that there is something that gives them meaning, gives them purpose? And that being, if you continue up this ladder, you'd eventually get to a single being. Because if there's two of them, it's like, why are there two? What gives that the distinction? And then you can say there's a higher level of perfection that gives that distinction between these two little g gods. And this pinnacle, this point at the spire, is what we call God. And in the Summa Theologiae, as you were talking a lot about the progression of the Summa by St. Thomas Aquinas. He does get into those distinctions, and to connect the dot, like the God that is the pinnacle of perfection is by necessity also the God of the infinite regress, the first mover. Because of the metaphysical aspects of how perfection works in with that. But it's really difficult to explain God, or like the essence of what a God is, to someone who's like, what is that?
Okay, so we obviously can't define it.
Yeah.
So let's say now I am a person who now understands, okay, God is the first mover, God is the uncaused cause. So let's say I understand, to an extent, the concept of a God. Mm-hmm. What would be your first step if you have to convince me now that what you just said is true?
So if you understand the concept, it's like, okay, right, because say in science or whatnot, we have models and theories for how the world works. Mm-hmm. But these theories aren't actually the world. Our theories of physics aren't actually the world doing their stuff. We explain quantum mechanics with these mathematical computations. We throw it on a computer, it plugs for hundreds of hours, and we get an explanation for a hydrogen atom with 2 electrons put onto it somehow. But if you look right there, right? Exactly where I'm pointing. I'm pointing to a very particular atom, a very particular hydrogen atom that's doing that very same thing, interacting with billions of other atoms in ways, in physics it's called the many-body problem, where it's like there's just too many bodies, we cannot physically explain it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have ways of putting theories around, but like it's just too much. And so it's like, yeah, I can see that, we can have a theory for a God to be this essence, the pinnacle of creation, but this theory does not necessitate that that is the truth, right?
Because people can say, like, the infinite regress isn't a problem if matter is eternal. Like that kind of thing. It's like they have this theory that, like, you don't need a first mover if there was no need for the first movement kind of thing. So it's like you can have a theory without necessarily having that theory be...
Yeah.
That theory is not reality.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you very much that not all theories are reality. I have the theory that Michael is actually a goth kid in disguise. But
I started wearing this black shirt, man.
You're looking depressed right now. Wearing a black shirt, how dare you? Yeah.
Sorry, you can keep going. I just wanted to, like...
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to take a slight sidestep from the intellectual side of understanding God, because interestingly enough, as much as I love like intellectual pursuits and intellectual understandings, like that's not why I believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wasn't convinced God exists because of the failures of an infinite regress of contingency, or the failures of this or that theory, or the idea of a hierarchy of goods, or this or that. Like that all came later.
Yeah.
And part of my reason why I love that stuff is because it is a way of us trying to approach some aspect of what God is.
Mm-hmm.
But like when I think about God to myself, it's an experience, and that's like knowing God is an experience, and that's such a difficult thing to explain, because you go out walking on the trails, you see the depths of the forest. You go up on a mountain and you see rolling hills, forest. There's so many creatures, so many animals. And you're just like overwhelmed with how beautiful it is and just how amazingly cool that is. And like, why is it that the tree over on that mountain looks very similar to the tree over there, except maybe with a slightly different hue of green, such that when I view it as a whole, it's like a painting, a progression of the green color, but like there's so much similarities, there's so much connections, and everything just fits together. And I guess this is getting into a more intellectual thing, but like that is an experience to understand just the fitting togetherness of all things. Like that just makes no sense. Yeah. You know, if I take a bunch of cardboard and a bunch of really, really sharp knives, and I put it into this indestructible box so that the knives don't cut through the box, and I shake it up, okay? At the end of it, I'll have a bunch of scrap, a bunch of meaningless scrap. I mean, I could probably burn it fairly well. It'd be useful for like packing stuff, but it ain't going to be a puzzle. And yet, when we look at a puzzle with all of these intricately cut out pieces, you jumble it all together and it looks chaotic. Like I can't really explain this. Look at a 10,000 piece puzzle that's pure white. Try solving that. That's difficult. People have done stuff like that, which is insane. Yeah. But like you've got this puzzle. It's like it does not make sense. It looks like a pile of scrap. But if you put the time and effort in, you'll notice that the things fit together perfectly. Each piece has a spot. Each piece fits in perfectly. It may be hard to find that, but it does. And even though there's still 9,000 crazy pieces that you can't explain, there's still 1,000 pieces right here that just like fit in perfectly. And it's a puzzle, so it's like you know that it's all going to fit together perfectly. And like that's how I view God. It's like I understand that the world makes sense. You know, I don't go out during my day and be like, what if the sun, when it's up in the sky, turns into a bouncy ball, falls down, bounces a couple times, and I can pick it up and I can throw it in the other direction such that now the sun rises in the west and sets in the east. That makes no sense.
Because that's not how it works. It's like, you know that's not how it works. And there's not a chance that
some philosophers will say, actually, we don't really know if that's going to happen because induction doesn't prove anything. And I'm like, there is an intuitive sense we have in this world of sensibility.
Mm-hmm.
And this intuition, this experience of sensibility, I feel can only be explained by God.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no other way. Like, we are intellectual beings. We know that to ourselves. Like, we just know that. And you can't have sensibility come out of nothing. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, it's a circular argument, but everything in the end is a circular argument. And to get into like my favorite definition of God, God is, oh shoot.
Is it really your favorite if you can't remember it?
Yes, because it's confusing. God is what is necessary for God to exist. Because a lot of people say, your argument for God is circular. I'm like, this argument for science is circular, you know? But science needs a sense of sensibility to explain the world. We go back to the Big Bang. We don't really understand what happens before that. And science breaks down at these extremes that we don't understand. Black holes, the really small, many bodies, the early universe, and we can't explain that. And if we break out of time, science doesn't explain anything because it needs that. It needs that structure. Science cannot explain creation out of nothing because it needs to have the possibility for something to be created out of nothing. So in that way, it's like you need to have this thing that it rests on, and that thing has to be unexplained. God is a being that is his own rock he rests on. So he is a circular argument of being, but in that way he is fully self-sufficient. He doesn't rely on anything else to make him be. Science relies on this essence of things can make sense in order to be. It is not a circular. It crashes off somewhere and says, I stand on this rock. If this rock were to fall, I would die. God is circular enough that he is his own rock. There is nothing that, if the rock disappears, God disappears because he doesn't exist. But there is no rock that God rests upon because he is that self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
That's me trying to think.
What was I going to say? Science. So I've said this before, I think, and it's not exact because science can't prove everything. But I've heard people say like science can prove everything except for science itself. It's like science can explain things, but when it comes to explaining why science works, it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was thinking about, like Isaac Newton was a Christian. Like every major scientist that you can think of in the past was at least a theist. Yeah,
it's only been like the last couple hundred years.
Yeah, the atheistic scientist movement kind of is a pretty modern, comparatively, thing. But men expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. Like, you don't just expect logic to come from randomness and things that don't make like
right.
If you, again, with your cardboard box thing, if you had the knife and the cardboard in the box and you shook it all up and it got all cut up into little pieces, if you shook it up again, your expectation would be that it's going to stay a bunch of little cut up pieces.
Wait, you mean the super sharp knives aren't going to come backwards through a piece, put them together close enough such that the atoms and molecules
it's like when you shake it up again, you're not expecting it to come back together. You're not expecting order from disorder.
Yeah. It's called the second law of thermodynamics. Yeah. And do you know why we know that's true?
Science.
Because we just do it. It just makes sense. Like, honestly, sorry, before you continue, it's like the sheer amount of things that I learn as a graduate student in physics is just like, this is the way things are.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can explain it using this mathematical form and just say the second law of thermodynamics. And we can prove the second law of thermodynamics using some basic assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
which is the circular arguments that's like it rests on what?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So I want to take a little bit of a different approach to how I would kind of come at this question. So how do I want to say this? A lot of people so science and God are oftentimes presented as conflicting entities. It's like if you believe in science, you can't believe in God. If you believe in God, you can't believe in science. It's the way it's usually, not
Science
usually.
disproved God. Come on, what are you talking about?
Science can't disprove God because they're answering two different kinds of questions. So when I hear people say that, the way that I would kind of approach that, if that's something that you ever hear or you've ever asked yourself, is like, can I believe science? Like, and there's people who talk about like young Earth versus old Earth, like, and that's a whole thing. Whether you believe it one way or the other, I don't really care. I think it's kind of inconsequential. But it's like, can I believe what science says and still believe God? And a lot of people, primarily atheists, will tell you no. And they will tell you that these two things are conflicting, and that if you believe in God, that means you don't believe in science. And if you believe in science, you have to only believe in science, and you can't believe in God. And that's why people like John Lennox. I don't know. I keep on bringing him up. I don't know if you know who John Lennox is. But
I've heard of him.
That's why people like
but I
him
keep thinking of a musician.
That's why people like him are so rare, is because he's a mathematician, Oxford mathematician, and he is a devout Christian, and he's just such a rare thing to see because people think that it has to be science or God. But like I said, they're answering two different questions. So what people don't understand is the difference between mechanism and agency. Science is an answer to the question how, and God is an answer to the question why. So if me and Nick went out and looked at my car, and I showed Nick, I opened up the hood of my car and I showed Nick the engine, Nick wouldn't say that engine is incredible. Like, it's amazing that it just randomly came together one day. Like, he wouldn't just assume that because the engine has, the pistons and whatever, and it like all works together, and because the mechanisms are all tied together, and because it just works, his assumption would not therefore be that it did not need to be created. Nick is a smart person, and Nick would instead say, that's amazing that somebody engineered it to work that way. And so when people see like, you can talk about like the fine-tuning argument, for instance, where it's like if the strength of gravity was like, I don't even know what the number is. It's some insane number. It's like 1 out of 1 to the like 100,000th power or something. If it's like one part and that massive
1 part in
number
100,000 different or something, yeah.
It's way bigger than 100,000. It's
Okay.
like 1 to the 100th power or something.
That's a big... So to view that scale, that would be basically saying...
There aren't that many
power?
of anything in the universe, probably.
Well, first, there's about 10 to the 80 atoms in the universe. 10 to the... Is it 83 like photons? And so if you're doing 10 to the 100, that's basically saying, let's make it simpler. Let's just make it 10 to the 80.
Yeah.
That's just saying that
That
out
is
of
the number of
every
atoms.
single atom in the observable universe, if one of them was red and all the rest were blue.
The entire thing would fall apart.
Yeah. But they're all blue.
Exactly. So it's like, I don't look at that and say, that's insane that this randomly happened, and that there are so many other ones. Gravity is just like the one that first came to mind. Like, the number of finely tuned things that are so specifically tuned for life. Like, if gravity, again, 1 part and 1 to the 100, if it was any different, even the slightest bit, life would be impossible. I don't look at that and say it's so crazy that this happened randomly.
Not just like life. Like if it was that different, stars would not form.
No, yeah.
The universe would remain just this constant sea of plasma, or to condense back into a black hole very quickly and whatnot. Like it's not just saying like, oh, and life would be impossible. How do you know that? Well, because all of our science tells us that if it were this way, there would be no way for anything to be different.
Yeah. And no way for anything to be different actually leads to the next thing I wanted to say or talk about. So agency and mechanism are 2 different things. They answer the how and why questions. Science. So again, science is built on the assumption that science works. Mm-hmm. Like science doesn't work unless science works. Basically, like it's the logic behind it is completely dependent on the belief that the logic is sound. And so if you don't have that foundation, then it doesn't work at all. Which means that science is a dependent thing. And so if we look at the universe as a whole, the only way that we don't run into the problem of an infinite regress, or if we don't run into the problem of like what happened at the beginning to initiate the entire thing, is if the universe and time and space and matter are all necessary. Like if they have to exist. And even this is not a very scientific way of thinking about it, but if you can imagine something not existing, it's probably not really that necessary. Yeah. Like if you can if you can reasonably imagine something not existing, it doesn't prove that it's not necessary, but it increases the probability because
I can just imagine that God doesn't exist. It just
reasonably,
the world.
Though.
What do you mean by reason? That's it. Like
because then if you say if you make the assumption, like if you say I can imagine a world where God doesn't exist, then I can still ask the question. Okay, then where'd everything come from? I can still go. I can still say like
reasonably in the sense that you need to have an explanation. Like if to reasonably assume that Michael doesn't exist, I could be like, but who is this person sitting next to me?
Yeah.
And if you don't have an explanation, oh, that's John. He just looks like some dude named Michael. Then, like, if you don't have anything to explain it, that's not a reasonable explanation. Okay.
And so I can say, somebody could say like, oh, I can imagine God doesn't exist, and then I would say, okay, that's fair. Let's ask these questions now. Mm-hmm. I can reasonably imagine the universe not existing. I can reasonably imagine nothing existing at all. Nothing, like, you don't have to exist, and if you don't have to exist, why does the couch you're sitting on have to exist? Mm-hmm. And if the couch you're sitting on doesn't have to exist, why is your apartment or St. Louis City or the United States or the world or the universe have to exist? And then you can go on that infinite regress and you can like get all the way out, and it's like nothing has to exist. And based on the science, because I'm a Christian who believes in the science for the most part, time and space and matter all came into existence at the same instant, which means none of them are necessary individually. I guess you could imagine that they would be necessary as a whole, but again, they don't have to exist. Nothing has to be that way. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we would ask the question of why, because science can get you from now all the way back to the point of creation. But whatever happened before that, science has no idea. Yeah. Because that point in the creation of all of those things, of time and space and matter, is literally the foundation that the science is built on. So if you go back to that point, and you go past that point, you have nothing. You have no grounds to explain it with science. Like, you can't say, oh, well, this law existed and like the blah, 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 and these particles. It's like, no.
No, but like,
because that's not how
our
it
science
works.
can't explain it, but like, how do you know we haven't found out a way to explain what happened before the Big Bang? Like, yeah, sure, you know, general relativity, quantum mechanics don't explain that, But we clearly already know that general relativity and quantum mechanics fail at some things in the universe. And so there's definitely going to be something more that we can find. So why not that thing that we find explained before the creation?
This is like, when I think about this, maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying. Correct me if I am.
Possibly. I don't even understand what I'm saying because I don't believe it.
That's fair. That's a fair point. That's why, like, the devil's advocate things are hard.
Yeah.
From point A, which is the beginning, going back, there is nothing. People tend to try and define nothing with certain parameters, and they say, like, it's this kind of nothing, and they try and explain nothing as if nothing is some kind
it's
of
the
state
0 point
of being.
fluctuation energy.
Yeah, but like that necessitates there being something.
There being the
There has to
electromagnetic
be.
field with no fluctuations. Yeah.
Like, it's not that difficult of a question to answer. It's like, nothing is not a super complicated mathematical state of being, or it's literally the state of non-being. There is nothing. Frank Turek, he's another Christian guy. Boy, he always says, like, nothing is what rocks dream about. It's just there is no thing. That's why it's called nothing, is because it's no thing. Like,
that's actually, I really like, because that just shows, like, well, rocks don't dream. Yeah.
And you'd see that and it'd be like, okay, so why are you trying to define nothing? Is this like, you obviously understand the concept of nothing, so why are you trying to define it into oblivion to try and accommodate for your theoretical proposition about blah 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 blah? Like, if you go past this point and we say, if I ask you the question, how did something come from nothing? You can try and explain how the nothing produced the something, but it always comes back to, there is something in the nothing.
Possibility. Logic makes sense. Sorry, that's me.
You can go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so just because I said the logic thing, I something that everyone has as an assumption is that logic makes sense. You can have, like, the principle of non-contradiction. You cannot have something that both is and is not. My hand both is close together and not close together. False. It is close together, but not close together. I think that's the right number of double negatives. So anyway, we always use...
Wait. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We always use...
I had to think about that for a second.
Yeah, I know. We always use logic as a basic thing. And so it's like, oh, but okay, maybe this explanation doesn't work, but that... But it's like, true nothingness does not even include the possibility of logic. I have a thought experiment for you. Picture nothing. What do you picture? Darkness. You picture a vast expanse. You picture nothingness, and it's like, okay, I look around, dark, dark. I go over here, dark, dark. I go over there, dark, dark. There's two things you're assuming here. One, space.
Yep.
You're assuming spatial proportion. You're assuming relation between points. And two, you are assuming darkness. Darkness, well, that's not nothing. Darkness is the absence of light. Exactly. Darkness is a concept. In nothingness, there is not even a concept. You cannot picture nothingness, which is why when you're saying, like, oh, you can reasonably picture a universe that doesn't exist. I'm like, no, you can't. You cannot picture nothingness. You can picture blackness. You can picture not some things, but you cannot actually understand nothingness.
You can't understand it, but it's like you can.
This thing is nothing. I put a name. Well, where did I put it? To something. There's some concept of this thing that we call nothing that we are able to point to and name. And that means it's not nothing. And that's weird to think about. This is me, like, 16 years old being like, whoa, dude.
The other thing, this is totally unrelated, but you saying, like, me 16 years old.
Yeah.
It's like one of the mind-boggling moments that you have where you just realize something and you're like, oh my gosh, that is mind-blowing. Thinking about, like, an infinite regress and thinking about the possibility of, like, time stretching infinitely into the past. And I just like had this moment where I realized that if the past was infinite, right now could not happen because it is impossible to traverse an actually infinite number of things. Like you can't, if you start at the beginning of infinity, you literally can't reach. Like there's not even like, it's so hard to even conceptualize, but it's like, and then people try infinity. I don't think infinity is practically. I don't think it's a thing that can actually exist. You're a science person, so maybe you can explain that to me.
Okay.
And I understand that's a mathematical concept, but I think that that's all it is, because no matter how many of something there are or is, you could always count them. It's going to be an insanely high number.
Yeah.
Like if we say there's an infinite number of golf balls in the universe, and then you remove one of them, like how many of them are there? And it's like there's still a number of those things. It just is such an incomprehensibly large number that you can't understand it.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that it's actually infinite, because it's literally impossible to actualize an infinite number of things.
Do you mind if I go on a bit about infinities?
Go ahead, just for a little bit,
Oh,
because I don't really understand it. That's my like layperson understanding of it. But
so, first, mathematically speaking, there are like layers of infinities. But you were saying what you were talking about is the classic Zeno's paradox. Do you know? Have you heard about that?
Maybe, but not by that name.
Zeno's paradox, or Achilles and the hare, or there's any number of ways you could formulate it. So first, Achilles is. Let's say Zeno is trying to walk to that door that you cannot see because it's off screen. It doesn't exist. It is nothing. Yeah. You have to get halfway to the door first. Mm-hmm. So I go halfway to the door. You have to go halfway between there and the door again. So I go there. And then you have to go halfway, and you have to go halfway again and again. You have to go a half, a quarter, an eighth, a 16th, a 32nd, a 64th, a 128th, a 256th, a 512th, a 1024th, a 2048th, a 4096, or something like that.
Good job with that multiplication.
Hey, 2048, that game really worked out. But you have to keep going, and it just keeps going, and there's an infinite number of halves to get from here to anywhere else.
Theoretically.
And then that's the thing. It's just like, okay, you're right. And so Zeno's like, change cannot happen. There is no way for something to move from point A to point B because of this infinite amount of time. Mm-hmm. But I move from point A to point B. Disproven. Okay, so maybe infinity doesn't exist. Maybe infinity is just a mathematical construct. But it depends on how you look at it, because in a way, there are an infinite number of positions from here to there. Unless you think about space as quantized, but that's a weird thing to think. Some scientists say that, and it's like, that's not how we do anything, but okay. Yeah, it's a difficult thing. But a bit of explanation for those math nerds out there about infinities. There's one level infinity called countable infinite. Okay? Mm. So if you have on the number scale, I can go 1, 2, 3, and I can set up a pattern to keep going. Okay? Name any number, and I will count from 1, any positive integer. I will count from 1 to that positive number in a finite amount of time. I can tell you exactly how long it'll take. Okay? I can't do that. Theoretically, I could. But if you name a really high number, I can't do the math in my head about how long it would take. But theoretically, I could. Okay? That's countably infinite. But how large is the set of all integers? How large is 1, 2, 3 all the way up? How many of them are there?
I don't think that there's... But that's, again, the theoretical thing, because there's no practical application
of
that idea.
There's no physical.
Physical.
Yeah.
That's
the difficulty.
Yeah.
A lot of people delve into the world of the material. And Plato talks about this, Aristotle talks about this, all of these ancient philosophers talk about, like the world of ideals. Do we live in just a world of matter? Do we live in a world where things can happen? Am I a brain in a vat? Or all of these things? But yeah, okay. So if you don't want to say that, numbers actually exist.
Well, because you can make theories all you want, and you can theoreticize. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
into oblivion, but that doesn't actually change the world that you're living in. So like you're like you said, with like you can split the distance between you and the door in half an infinite number of times. You can still traverse that distance.
Yeah. So
the idea doesn't necessarily translate into reality. And so regardless of what the theory is, we live in a world that is a certain way.
Yeah.
That we understand it to be that way, regardless of what the theory says.
And there is truthness to theories, even if they are not the truth. Because part of this world underlies a sense of logic. And I'm not talking about like symbolic logic as you learned in high school or this or that. There is some aspect of things can make sense, as I've talked about. And so when we judge theories, we see how self-consistent they are. So yeah, you could theorize about anything and it can say whatever. It's like, yeah, I could theorize, that I can both be here and not here.
Theorize, not theoreticize.
Oh, did you say theoreticize?
I said theoreticize. That's not the right word. That's
I'm going to be a theoretician. Or a theorist.
Theorize.
Yeah. But like, that is not internally consistent. I could set up a set of rules to explain something and then follow through that set of rules. They're called axioms, and come to a contradiction where one of the axioms pushes up against the other and they do not like each other. So you cannot have both of those axioms set. That is an inconsistent theory. So when we talk about like, oh, you can theorize anything. Yes, you're right. But until we have a contradiction, that theory, so far as we know, is true. That's the principle of falsification or whatnot that you talk about. But, okay, so let's look at the consistency of me walking from here to the door. And you say, oh, there's not an infinite number of points. I'm like, okay, but if there is an infinite number of points, and then you say, but I can walk there. And I'm like, okay, yeah. So but I can use my theory if there's an infinite number of points and add on an axiom or something that allows me to explain going from point A to point B without breaking my idea of an infinite number of points. And that axiom is just simply, you can traverse, like you can go through an infinite number. Because when I'm going from point A to point B, that is a sense of time. And I could say, I have to go halfway to the door, and I have to go halfway again. And I can say, to explain this, each subsequent step takes half as long. So in a sense, you are multiplying two infinities together in a weird way. You're combining two infinities, and you're getting that door as the result. And mathematically, it's weird. It works out, but it's consistent. And so it's like, yeah, I don't like that.
It's internally consistent. I think my problem is that a lot of the times it seems like they aren't externally consistent. Like, I don't know, because even when you're saying like, you split it in half, but then it only takes half as long, but it doesn't matter because there's an infinite number. So even if it only takes half as long, you still would not ever reach the end because it's still time and there's still an infinite number of things you have to traverse. And infinity doesn't have an end. But it doesn't matter because infinity doesn't end. So it's like you still could not reach the end of infinity. And people, there's like, maybe you can explain this to me later because probably nobody wants to listen to me ask this kind of question. But there's like the different sizes of infinity. And people say like, there's like a bigger infinity. And when you add the bigger infinity to the smaller infinity, it's like the bigger one just swallows up the smaller one. But it's like what happened to the smaller one? Like you can't. That's again one of the theoretical things. I don't understand the way it applies to reality.
Okay, so
before I feel like maybe we're getting a little bit too.
Okay, I'll make it quick.
Okay, go ahead.
Because you asked the question, and it's a fascinating thing. And let's go into the mathematical and be like, yeah, we don't have to talk about this, but it doesn't really necessarily make sense physically. But like, let's talk about the mathematical to try to understand the different levels of infinity and why we know that they're different sizes. So this countable infinity that I'm saying, give me any number, any integer, and I can count to it in a finite amount of time. And that finite is important because that gets rid of the infinite. Okay, so we define it by finite values and just say, give me a number and I'll go to it. But I don't ever put a limit on the numbers. Give me a number and I'll go to it and I'll go past it. That's how we define countable infinity. I'll go to a number and go past it. Any number you give me, I can go past it. So therefore, there is no finish. Because if there's a finish, I'd say, give me that number, I'll go past it. That's the normal sense of infinity. Then the next level of infinity, so far as we know, is called uncountable infinite. And this is, if in the numbers sense, countable infinite is all the integers. Uncountable infinite is all of the numbers, the entire real line, all the irrational numbers. And the way this is different from the countable infinites is give me a number. There is, so like I cannot set up a pattern.
There's an infinite number of numbers between 1 and 2. Is that kind of what you're going to get?
Yeah. I mean, but there's also countable infinite number of numbers between 1 and 2, which is weird. Because like the number of rational numbers between 1 and 2 is equal to the number of integers from 1 to infinity, equal to in the weird mathematical sense. But there is no pattern that I can set up saying I'm going to do this, then this, then this, that is going to guarantee in a finite time, that's the important part, in a finite time, I will not guarantee to get any number you pick, any irrational number. If you pick a random irrational number, and I go on my pattern from this number to this number to this number, there is no guarantee that I will ever get there in a finite amount of time. In fact, it's almost guaranteed that I will not. And that's different levels of infinity. And there's different ways you can talk about it, but you don't want to go too much into that. We can talk about that later.
So I'm trying to think of a way to tie it all back together, because we just had a big theoretical discussion about infinity that was probably confusing. I know. We've wanted to talk about this forever, and we were finally like, we'll just do it today. How do we tie this all back together?
Okay, you talk about infinities. Some people call God the infinite, the one who is infinitely perfect.
So, yeah, sorry, actually, go ahead.
No, that was my question.
Okay. The way that we've been talking about infinite, I wouldn't say the infinitely perfect, but the way we've been talking about infinity relates to a mathematical or like based off of time kind of thing. This is something that I realized recently. And again, this is one of those things where it's like I think it and I can say it. And I don't know if it's true, so don't take my word on this. We know that God doesn't experience time like we do. But I was thinking about it recently, and I kind of came to the conclusion that maybe God doesn't, unless he forces himself into time like he did with the incarnation, he doesn't really experience time at all because he is completely outside of it. So unless he enters into it, he doesn't experience it. And so if I say the universe can't be infinite because it's impossible to traverse an actually infinite number of things, somebody might say, well, you say God is infinite. I don't really say God is infinite in the same way that we think of it, because he is completely outside of time, so the concept of infinity doesn't even apply.
He transcends the finite.
He transcends the finite. He transcends time and space and matter completely. And so it sounds like I'm trying to like just avoid the question, but by definition he has to be that way. So he can't. The concept, again, I'm just going to say it again, the concept of infinity doesn't really apply to a being who is by definition outside of that concept. Completely.
I can definitely see this distinction, and that's a very interesting distinction to think about.
Because like, and it was always one of the things that hurt my brain. I don't want to say it doesn't, because it still does when I like really try and think about it too much, but it would always hurt my brain. I'm like, I can't even conceptualize something existing forever. Like if I think about God, I can't picture this is where the universe starts and then God goes back.
I can go to a point and I can go beyond it, but I cannot picture like the entirety of everything.
Because there's not like you do that, but it's like even if you say that's all of time, it's like past that completely.
Yeah, basically I'm saying, come here, I can go there. Come here, I can go there.
Yeah.
It's just like, and you just keep doing that.
But it's like that doesn't even apply.
Yeah.
Because it's just, there's the classic thing of like time, space, and matter all depend on each other to exist. Because if you have if you have matter but no time or space, where and when would you put it? If you have space but no time or matter, when would you put it? Or like, just like there's that kind of thing. And so they all have to come into existence at the same point. And so whatever caused those things to come into existence, by definition, has to be outside of them. And so I think I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I know I have always understood the idea of God existing eternally completely wrong, because I've been trying to understand it based around my definition and my kind of like preconceived notions of like what time is. And I experience time the way I experience it, and I'm trying to conceptualize infinity based on the way, or an infinite being based on the way I experience time. But again, unless God enters into time, he doesn't really, at least I would say, he probably doesn't really experience it the same way. Like, it's not like God has existed forever in the sense that we would think about forever, because he's outside of forever.
I do agree. Like, he is outside, and there are forms of explanation. I have a question for you. Is there something about God that we can understand?
I feel like not completely.
No, that's why something that we can understand somewhat. Is there anything related in any sense to God that we can come to some form of a possible understanding?
Are you trying to lead me in a specific direction with this question?
No, I just wanted to see how you think about that.
So, what I would say is we can know about God what God has revealed to us. Because I think that he has revealed himself in time. He has entered into time.
Do we know everything about how he has revealed himself to us?
Like, I don't think we could ever even begin to scratch the surface.
Okay. So there is a large amount of that God has revealed himself to us. So he is outside of time. He is outside in this unexplainable manner, and we cannot approach that in any sense of the word. I agree with you on that. And then you say that God has revealed us to himself in some way, or revealed him to us in some way. And I could talk about, like, the world he gave us is part of it, part of his revelation to us. The concept of logic, from which we can derive mathematical formulations, is part of that. But so, like, we can understand some aspect, and at some point it's like, we can keep understanding more. Because do you ever think that in this world we would understand all that there can possibly be known about how God has revealed himself to us?
No.
So there's always more we could learn in this world. And so we can extrapolate, like, we can, in this world, there's this infinite way of understanding God, because we can never reach it. That's one explanation of the word infinite, is unreachable. You know, it's an infinite distance from here to China for me to walk there, because I can't walk there because there's water in the way. Not the best definition. But yeah, so because now that we know that there's scales of understanding stuff, can we conceptualize what it is like to be unable to understand something greater? And this is where I
have to rephrase that question.
Yeah, this is where I'm leading into. So, I read a book recently, Flatland. It's basically
also, sorry, disclaimer. I'm saying a lot of things that I may not understand. I'm just trying to get thoughts out, because it's like I think about this stuff a lot, and I have questions that nobody really seems to be able to answer about some of it.
Please don't ever only say stuff that you understand, because I don't understand anything that I say.
Pretty much everything I say on this podcast, I don't understand.
Yeah, so here's a book. I'm holding a book for those who are listening on the podcast, aka Nick in 3 days. That's me. I'm Nick. I take one page of this book, okay? And this is our universe, okay? Sure, we might live in a 4-dimensional space-time or an 11-dimensional height, whatever. Consider this is our universe, where we can go forward on the page, left and right on the page. We cannot go up and down. The passage of time would then be explained by, this is our universe, and this is our universe 1 second from now, and this is our universe 2 seconds from then, and then this is our universe moving through time as this sheet moves into this sheet, moves into this sheet, okay? And when we're on this sheet, we can look into the past in some way and be like, oh, I understand how this worked. But that's not where I am now because I'm still on this one flat sheet, okay? This is just in the past. So this is the universe now, and then this is the universe a second from now, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a two-dimensional universe. We live in a three-dimensional universe. We can look at this book as a whole. Mm-hmm. And we can look at each of these pages and see how it progresses through time. So it is possible for there to be, conceptually speaking, of course, which is how we always have to talk about things, it is conceptual for there to be some existence that cannot understand something, but some other existence can. Mm-hmm. So 2 dimensions cannot understand 3 dimensions, but 3 dimensions can understand 2 dimensions. And what we do when we talk about God in this infinite sense is we extrapolate to be that God, being out of time, would, in a sense, be able to look at time as a book. And it wouldn't take him time to flip through. He'd just see it all at once. Yeah. And that's like his being out of time. It's like he can see all things at once, and he is not subject to time. And you get some really weird, seemingly contradictions that don't contradict once you delve a bit deeper, but it's just confusing as all get out. Because like once you stop talking about time, we don't understand anything. We need time. We need change to be able to understand things. Mm-hmm. And if it's not there, we can't. Yeah. But we try. And we try. And we talk about infinities. We say, okay, we're in this 2-dimensional world. It's like, okay, but there's an infinite number of times. We say this sheet stacks up infinitely. Like we can talk about this. And yeah, it's not the way it actually is, but it's the only way we have of approaching it so far as we know. So yeah, I'll agree with you. Like these ideas of the infinite seem a bit iffy. My brother, who loves talking about like math stuff with me, is also like that. He's like, I don't really believe there's different levels of infinity. And it's like, yeah, no, there's mathematically it makes sense, but it just doesn't sit well.
It doesn't make that much sense.
Yeah, it just doesn't. And it's like, yeah, you're probably right. But it's like the best we got. Mm-hmm. These ideas of the infinite are the best we got at explaining something like God. The closest we can get to explaining God in this like conceptual framework, because there's other ways of approaching God, is through extrapolating ad infinitum to the infinity and saying, well, God isn't here, God isn't here. If you pick any point, any explanation, I can say God isn't this, he's something beyond that. Any point. And then I can go further, and that's infinite. And so we say, God is the end of that. The end of this thing that never stops. That makes no sense. But it's the best we got. Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting that you just brought to that, because we should probably end soon.
But it's been a while,
how you were talking about earlier, like almost at the very beginning, about how there are these different things, but there's always something greater.
Yeah.
And how God is at the top of that. He's at the top of the spire.
Yeah, spire, point.
Yeah, it's 2 different things, but it kind of ties it all together. It's kind of annoying that we spent so much time. It was really good.
I'm sorry.
No, because I was doing
I
it
could
too.
talk about. This is stuff I think about all the time, and it sometimes is a little scary to think about. And I don't really talk about it with a lot of people because a lot of people get like freaked out by some ways or say, I don't understand that. And it's like, I don't either. Can you help? Like, I don't care that you don't understand it. I don't understand it either. It's like, can you figure out how to understand something a bit better?
I love it.
So please, I hate it when people are like, oh, you're so smart. I can't understand this thing you're doing. I'm like, oh, I have so much to say about
I'm not wise because I know everything. I'm wise because I know that I know nothing.
Yeah. It's like, I have so many words to say about like people's idea of what smart is. And it's a big annoyance of mine that people belittle themselves because they're like, I'm not smart like you. It's like, okay, sure. I'll admit I have a mathematical mind and I can conceptualize things mathematically in an easier way than some people can. And for those people approaching math, it's like, it's a little harder for them. And so in that way, I am smarter in the very specific sense of mathematical, conceptualized, blah, 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 to some people. And it's like, people don't give themselves enough credit. Yeah. I see such intelligence in people that does not show itself in the sense of being able to do mathematical computations.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's...
No, I was just going to say, like, because it was amazing and I love talking about it, but there's so much more that I wanted to talk about.
Oh, I'm so...
because I was doing it too, so it's not like it's your fault. if I didn't have my computer here, I'd probably just talked for like 3 hours.
Yeah, I was looking at my watch.
Because it's like we didn't even touch.
Only been going for a little over an hour.
Really? I kind of am like closing it anyway.
Well, it took us like 20 minutes to get started.
That's true.
So like the actual video, what you guys are watching, on his screen it says it's been 1 hour 22 since it started. I bet you it's only been like an hour 5, an hour 10.
Yeah. Well, like we didn't even get to touch on like causal chains or like the moral argument.
We did talk about causal chains.
We did a little bit.
So it's like, yeah.
You know, there's so much.
There was something you were talking about earlier that just like if I don't,
it's a seed planted in my brain.
Yeah,
that I remember
if I don't exist and this couch, then this couch doesn't need to exist. That's the argument of contingency, but you did it backwards, which is really interesting.
Yeah,
because you know, Thomas Aquinas in Argument of Contingency says, if I exist and I'm sitting on a couch, then clearly the couch exists. But you kind of like went backwards. If I don't exist, then the couch doesn't need to exist because, like, the couch is here because I'm sitting. I was like. And the
for you the couch is there.
Yeah, there's weird things, but like some people can't tell the difference between the contingency versus the cause and effect. But one is temporal, the other is not. Contingency is not temporal, which is why it's hard to understand.
Yeah.
Me sitting on this couch does not necessitate a time dependence of the couch existing. It necessitates a now dependence. And Riley just walked past, really concerned for me. But yeah. There's
just so much. There's so much.
Like we can't talk about all these proofs for God because we could talk for hours about any of them and get what probably some people might think nowhere.
Yeah, we don't. And that was kind of the thing with this is that just walk. It doesn't even matter. But we didn't like get anywhere, I guess. So it's like if you're listening to this and you're expecting some kind of like massive conclusion to like, oh, this is how like that we didn't get there.
I got one for you. God exists. That's my conclusion. I can't tell you how I got there.
But it's just if you're listening and you're confused, that's okay because so are we.
And so is Alex O'Connor.
And so is Alex O'Connor. And so is Richard Dawkins. And so was Christopher Hitchens. And so is
Plato.
Sam
so is Aristotle. We are all confused people. Some of you listening might know the name Boy Number Confused. It makes no sense to people who weren't in on that joke. But I'm Boy Number Confused. But we are all confused because that's the state of being we live in.
Yeah.
And what do we do with that? We strive towards an understanding. And that is what Plato did. That's what Aristotle did. St. Thomas Aquinas. That's what Richard Dawkins does. That's what Alex O'Connor does. And we all do it in our own different ways. But like, we can't say that a confusion means that we have no understanding of things. Because we are all confused.
Anyway, the other big... Because... we're not going to make this into like a philosophy, like apologetics podcast. The other argument for God that I want to talk about at some point is the moral argument.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Because that has a lot of practical implications. It's like, if right and wrong exist, what do you do with that? But like, how do you know the right and wrong exist?
We'll get at that
so
in some future
I do want to
video.
talk about the moral argument because I think that's the most compelling case for me. That is the most compelling argument for God.
There was probably about 7 minutes ago when I timestamp it. I was probably exactly right. I doubt it. But where I was saying it's like, and these are like, that's all we can do. Like that's the best we got for explaining God. In this conceptual mathematical way, that's the best we got. Yeah. Because there's other ways that are better at reaching God.
Yeah.
And the moral is one of them.
Yeah, and it's like, again, it's the how versus the why. It's like asking the scientific, logical questions that are super intellectual and like haughty. No, that's not the right word. Super like...
high.
There's a word for that. I can't think of what it is. Super like...
extemporaneous, stylistic, zootopia. I'm just trying to think of long words.
Super intellectual and hard to understand. I don't really understand how to... understand them. And then there's the why, and there's more of the emotional kind of moral ethical questions, which is what the moral argument is all about. So it won't be next week probably, but at some point in the future we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure that there.
And if one of you puts a comment saying, "I want to hear about the moral argument," we'll do it a lot sooner than we would otherwise.
Maybe we'll do it in 2 weeks instead of a year or something. Who knows? But I guarantee that we'll talk about arguments for God.
That's a beautiful thing.
Forever, and when Mr. Cobb does it with us. Anyways, that's all we got, I think.
That's
for
all we
now,
got.
anyway.
Without Fulton here, it's hard to get a point. Spire. But yeah.
Yeah. If you gain anything from this, if we talked about anything that you didn't understand, if we helped you understand something, if we said something that you think we didn't understand and you want to explain it to us, leave a comment, DM us.
Please disprove argue against some of the things I said.
If you can explain,
I made a lot of claims about science, and Michael's like, "I believe you. That's probably how the math works. Disprove me, please, because then it'd be fun to have a good conversation."
And then prove to me that actual infinites can actually exist. Try and leave a comment explaining how infinity can practically exist in the physical realm, and I would love to read that because I don't think you can do it. There's a challenge.
You have to rely on conceptualizing. Yeah,
I don't think you can do it.
I've never thought about it
if
that
you
way.
want to challenge, then go ahead and do that.
You're going to make me lose faith in science and able to explain things because infinity doesn't exist. Oh,
maybe it does, and I'm just not a scientist, so I don't
what's
understand
hilarious is there's a series that I just watched clips of, but I haven't actually watched, Young Sheldon and whatnot. And at one point, this little kid that thinks he's so smart and whatnot, and is smart in many ways, sure, whatever, says zero doesn't exist, and they proved it. And then they went through a couple of things. It's like zero doesn't exist because zero is the concept of nothingness, and nothingness doesn't exist, so therefore zero doesn't exist. And it's like, everything's false. And I'm like, what? It's nonsense.
Yeah.
But it's like that idea of like if you deal in the conceptual, it's like you're missing the physical. And it's like I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Is there something that you want to finish us out on? Some way of wrapping up what we've talked about?
I don't even know, man. I can't, in my own head, I can't even remember everything that we talked about because we talked about a lot. But I would say this because this is what led me down the road of trying to understand all this stuff more, and I obviously don't. After you listen, if you got this far, you know that I don't understand it. But
you're gonna have a very low view count.
Yeah. Even if they watch all the way through, they're gonna be like, "What did I just listen to?"
It's like this is a fever dream.
But
it's my mind.
Allow yourself the freedom to ask questions because, like I was saying, I was having trouble understanding God being infinite, and that doesn't mean that there's not an explanation for how God could just exist. Like that doesn't mean that there's not an explanation for how God could be who be.
God be who be.
But if you never allow yourself to ask for the explanation, if you never allow yourself to seek that explanation out, then when somebody asks you, that's the big thing with this. There might be some people who are going to be convinced by intellectual arguments and stuff, but more often than not, that's not going to be what convinces people. However, I lied earlier. There was an atheist that tried to talk to me one time. So
one time.
I'm not going to tell the story of it because it's whatever. But there will be people who ask you intellectual questions and they say, what about this? And how do you explain this? And how do you explain that? And why does God allow this? And why does God not allow that? And it's like, you will get these questions. And when you get those questions, if you don't have some kind of answer, you'll start to ask yourself the same question. If you don't seek out the answer, then it'll plant a seed of doubt in your heart. And if you don't try and find the answer to it, it'll grow. And it'll just cause a lot of problems. So just, if you have questions, look for the answer. Yeah. Don't be content with just accepting things because it's the way that, because you were told that's just the way it is. Give yourself the freedom to go and look for the truth. And if you're Christian, I think you're probably going to find it in the place you're expecting it, but you might understand it in a way that you didn't understand it before. So just give yourself the freedom to ask questions is kind of the big thing that I would say, because it's hard to really sum up everything else we talked about.
Yeah. No, that's a really important thing to say. It is, do not be afraid of asking questions. It is not heretical to ask questions. Okay? You can go up to your priest and ask, like, why do we believe that Jesus is fully present in the Eucharist?
Mm-hmm.
That's not a heresy to ask a question. It's like, if you want to understand more, you can do that. And there's ways of understanding more. But you can't be like, you should be like, oh, I don't really understand this at all. I feel like I want to understand more because it seems like it doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a heresy to ask questions. It's a heresy to outright oppose the dogmas of the Catholic Church. That's the definition of heresy. But you could be like, I don't understand this dogma. I have a weird question that I can't explain. I have faith that there is an explanation for it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can search it out and you can find and seek for it. But it's not a heresy to ask questions.
Yeah.
I'm going to finish with a couple of anecdotes. One, I heard, I don't have citations or whatnot for this, but it'd be cool to believe that roughly 66% of scientists under 40 are theists. Everyone's like, science disproves God, science...
It's not what the scientists said.
Yeah, like literally a huge portion of the young scientist population believe in God in some way or another. It's the oldest scientists who there's a lower population because it's kind of cool not to believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least back in the 19th century, that was a big philosophical thing. It's like, oh my goodness, what if God doesn't exist? And all the scientists are like, oh, whoa. And now the young scientists are like, what are you guys talking about? This makes no sense. Yeah. And there's something that Chesterton, Gilbert Chesterton, a great philosopher of the 19th century, great writer, super smart person, he said that if everyone were to live for 1,000 years, everyone would die, either a member of the Catholic Church or a complete nihilist about everything in life. So a really smart dude, 10 years before he converted to Catholicism, note that, he said this before he was a Catholic. He wasn't a Catholic at this time. And he said, if everyone were to live long enough, the only two places they would end up, in terms of an intellectual understanding, is complete nihilism. Nothing matters. There's no point. There's nothing. Or they would be a part of the Catholic Church. 10 years before he converted to Catholicism. Yikes. That dude's cool.
G.K. Chesterton.
G.K. Chesterton. Yeah. That's. I said Gilbert.
You said Gilbert, and I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, G.K. Chesterton.
Yeah.
But that was like a really cool thing to hear. So that's a little anecdote for you.
Yeah.
Whether or not you want to believe that, up to you. But I believe it because it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Those are the only two fully internally consistent worldviews. Absolutely nothing matters. And God.
Yep.
Those are God is internally consistent, and the other thing that's internally consistent is nothing ever matters. You can choose which one you believe.
Hopefully you can tell which one we believe. Hopefully.
I hope so. I might have said some sarcastic remarks earlier that might have been misinterpreted.
But yeah, like I said, leave a comment if you heard something you liked, or if you heard something you didn't like, if you heard something you understood that you didn't understand before, or if you heard something that you didn't understand even after we tried to explain it.
Such a convoluted way of saying things, but that's how our mind is going right now. We're so confused.
Leave a comment, DM us, follow us on Instagram, and sub to the YouTube, and then on Spotify too, just so that you can follow.
High five Michael at UMSL. So he's like, wait, there's a random person at UMSL that watches that. It's crazy.
If you go to UMSL, then I'm
there.
I'm not going to tell you where I am because
you can recognize his hair. He's
you'll find me. Hopefully.
Unique.
Anyway. Thank you for listening.
We will see you next time with Fulton here.
Next time, hopefully with Fulton.
With a little more cohesive.
Fulton, I realize once we start talking, I've always realized that Fulton's the one who kind of grounds us because we can get kind of flighty and whatever.
Man,
but anyway,
you had nothing.
Yeah,
I could go much more.
I could go for literal hours. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Peace out.
Have a good time.
Have a good life.